I can't let you die here, Grandma." Anya's voice, just 12 years old, was lost in the biting wind, but she knew her grandmother, deaf to the world, would never hear the guttural growl that already shook the frozen ground beneath her feet. 1,000 hungry eyes, yellow as the flames of frozen hell, gleamed in the Arctic darkness, emerging from the blizzard like striped ghosts. The snow, which had seemed untouched moments before, now promised imminent carnage. She had only one chance, and what she did to protect her only family would become a legend, whispered by the icy wind for generations, an impossible defiance against the fury of nature. Anya felt her heart pound in her chest, a frantic drum that seemed to echo the imminent danger. Her small fingers, already numb from the cold that pierced her fur gloves, clenched into tight fists. Fear was an icy wave, but it was soon replaced by a fierce flame of determination. She couldn't afford to freeze, not for a second. Her eyes, previously fixed on the vast and menacing silhouette of the tigers, turned to the small wooden cabin, from which a wisp of smoke lazily rose into the grey sky. Inside, her grandmother, Grandma Lena, was probably sitting by the fire, weaving or mending some piece of clothing, oblivious to the death that prowled so close. The image of Grandma Lena, with her wrinkled hands and gentle smile, flooded Anya with renewed strength. She was Anya's last link to the world, the only family she had left in the solitary vastness of Yakutia. The girl closed her eyes for an instant, searching her memory for the stories her grandmother told her on long winter nights. Tales of ancestral hunters who read the signs in the snow, who understood the wild heart of the tundra, who transformed weakness into cunning and bravery. "The cold is a friend, Anya." Her grandmother's silent voice seemed to whisper in her mind. "The snow, a veil, darkness, a powerful ally." Anya opened her eyes, and the world around her seemed to brighten, despite the gloom. The 1,000 tigers were not just a menacing mass. They were individuals, each with their instincts, their hunger. She watched one of them, larger than the others, sniffing the air near the makeshift fence of dry branches. Its tense muscles, its tail swaying slowly, revealed a dangerous patience. They wouldn't attack immediately. They were testing, evaluating. They were predators, yes, but also creatures of the cold who respected the strength and intelligence of those who faced them with courage. The girl scanned the landscape. The cabin was a tiny point of warmth and life. Around it, deep snow, trees twisted by the wind, ice covering the frozen stream. Everything seemed useless, but Anya knew that every element of that inhospitable environment could be a tool. Ancestral wisdom wasn't about fighting head-on, but about deceiving, disorienting, about using the environment to one's advantage. She needed something that would make those 1,000 tigers retreat, something that would speak to them in the only language they understood, that of danger and instinctive survival. Her grandmother inside the cabin coughed softly. Anya felt a pang in her chest. Time was crucial. She couldn't afford to hesitate. A plan began to form in her mind, still hazy, but with a clear starting point. She needed fire, a lot of fire, and something that could create a barrier, an illusion of strength. Her small hand reached for the rusty axe leaning against the cabin's outer wall, a heavy, cold object that suddenly seemed a symbol of her own resilience and unwavering courage. With a deep breath, Anya turned to face the darkness, her eyes fixed on the yellow dots that watched her, and took the first step in her desperate battle. Anya felt the weight of the axe in her small hands, but the adrenaline coursing through her veins kept her from trembling. The icy metal seemed to burn her skin, but she gripped it firmly. The tiger's eyes, once mere dots in the darkness, now seemed closer, more intense, reflecting the faint light of the stars and snow. She could feel the air vibrate with their presence, a primal tension that enveloped her. With each low growl that escaped the pack, Anya felt a shiver run down her spine, but she didn't avert her gaze. It was a game of patience, a dangerous dance between predator and prey, and she was determined not to be the prey. Her plan, still in fragments, depended on speed and the intelligent use of limited resources. Fire. It was the only thing that could scare such a vast horde. But not a small fire. She needed a wall of flames, something that would make them hesitate, that would remind them of the danger that man, even the most fragile, could represent. She turned to the twisted forest, where dry branches and dead trees lay piled under the snow. Every piece of wood would be an ally. With concentrated effort, Anya raised the axe. The first blow was clumsy, the blade slipping on the frozen bark of a fallen branch. Her muscles ached from the impact, but she didn't stop. A second blow, stronger, and the branch snapped with a dry crack that seemed too loud in the oppressive silence of the tundra. The tiger's yellow eyes moved, following the sound, but they kept their distance. They were curious, perhaps, at the audacity of that small figure. Anya began to gather the branches, dragging them with difficulty towards the cabin. Her hands, despite the gloves, began to burn from the cold and friction. With each trip, she looked at the cabin door, imagining Grandma Lena, peaceful in her silent world. The image of her grandmother with her serene face was the fuel for her determination. She couldn't fail. She couldn't allow the last remnant of her family to be devoured by savage hunger. The pile of wood began to grow, a fragile mound against the immensity of the threat. It wasn't enough. Far from it. She needed more, much more. Her eyes fixed on a dead tree, a thick dried-out trunk that lay a few meters from the fence. It was too heavy for her to drag, but perhaps it could be used as a base for a fire barrier. The idea of a circular bonfire surrounding the cabin began to take shape. The axe rose and fell rhythmically, cutting thinner branches, breaking pieces of rotten wood. Sweat ran down her forehead, despite the extreme cold, and her lungs burned with each icy breath. Every movement was an act of pure will. She could feel the tiger's gazes on her, a constant pressure, but she refused to be intimidated. The wisdom of her ancestors, which spoke of connection to the land and cunning for survival, guided her hands. She needed something to light the fire. Inside the cabin, there was a box of matches and a piece of flint that her grandmother used to light the lamp. Entering the cabin meant leaving the pile of wood unprotected, but there was no other option. With a pounding heart, Anya ran to the door, opened it quickly, and peeked inside. Grandma Lena was sitting, her back to the door, weaving a wool shawl. Her face was illuminated by the soft glow of the fire in the hearth. Anya entered, grabbed the box of matches and the flint, and before her grandmother could turn, if she even felt the icy breeze, the girl was already back out in the tundra. Time was an enemy as relentless as the tigers. She needed to act, and fast. With the materials in hand, Anya knelt near the pile of branches, her small, agile fingers preparing the tinder for the first spark, while the 1,000 yellow eyes continued to watch her from the darkness, awaiting the next move of that small but surprisingly courageous girl. She struck the first match against the damp box. The faint spark flickered, but the tiny flame was swallowed by the biting wind before it could touch the kindling. A pang of despair chilled her chest, but Anya pushed it away. There was no room for failure. She tried again, cupping her hands around the flame, feeling the sting of the cold. The second match lit, and the small beam of light danced, bravely resisting. With extreme care, Anya brought it to the finest kindling. Smoke rose, and then, with an almost inaudible crackle, a small yellow flame sprouted, licking at the dry wood. It was a miracle, a point of life defying the darkness of the tundra. The 1,000 eyes of the pack moved in unison, focusing on the new light, A louder growl echoed across the frozen vastness, a warning of their irritation, but they didn't advance. The flame, however small, was an invisible barrier, a sign of power that the predators respected. Anya felt a momentary relief, but she knew this was only the beginning. Such a tiny fire wouldn't keep 1,000 hungry tigers away for long. She needed more. She needed a wall of flames, as she had imagined. With the initial flame established, Anya began to feed the fire with the gathered branches. Each addition was made with care, not to smother the nascent fire. The heat began to spread, melting the surrounding snow and releasing the damp smell of burning wood. The orange glow danced on the dark stripes of the nearest tigers, who retreated a few steps, their growls now lower, more cautious. They respected fire, the untamed force it represented. The pile of wood she had gathered was pathetically small. She would need much more to create a protective circle around the cabin. Her eyes swept the forest again, searching for fallen trunks, dry branches. The dead tree she had noticed earlier, heavy and dried out, now seemed her only hope for a solid fire base. With the axe in hand again, Anya approached the fallen tree. It was a Herculean task for a 12-year-old girl. She tried to cut pieces from the trunk, but the wood was hard and frozen. Each blow sent a painful shock through her arms. Tears of frustration and exhaustion began to form in her eyes, but she blinked them away. The image of Grandma Lena, with her serene face and gentle smile, was a constant reminder of what was at stake, an anchor for her determination. She couldn't cut the trunk, but she dragged smaller pieces, using her body as a lever. Every movement in the snow was an effort, the cold draining her energy. The tigers watched, silent, shadows at the edge of the circle of light. Slowly, Anya brought more wood to the bonfire. The fire, once a small hope, now crackled more strongly, flames dancing high. The heat was a balm for her frozen hands and face, a comfort. She fed the fire, expanding the thin line of protection. With each branch, the shield of flames grew against the darkness and the threat. The night would be long, and the battle would demand every ounce of her courage. Anya, with aching muscles and a body trembling from exhaustion, watched the fire. The flames, once timid, now danced with more vigor, casting flickering shadows over the snow and the dark silhouettes of the tigers. They were still there, a wall of hungry eyes in the gloom, but the collective growl had diminished to a constant murmur, a sound of frustration and caution. She knew the fire was her only defense, but the barrier was still fragile, a circle too small to ward off 1,000 determined predators. She needed more. She needed something that would make those animals feel an even greater danger, a threat that would overcome their hunger. Her eyes, burning from smoke and fatigue, scanned the tundra again. The dead tree, which refused to be cut, remained there, a useless giant. But what if she didn't need to cut it? What if she could use it in another way? An idea, a flash of inspiration from her ancestors' stories ignited in her mind. Grandma Lena always said that the land provided everything. One just had to know how to look. The snow, the ice, the wind, all could be allies. Anya remembered an ancient technique, used by hunters to ward off large and dangerous animals, creating sound and smoke traps, not to harm, but to scare and disorient. She needed something that would amplify the fire, that would create the illusion of a much larger bonfire. Her eyes fixed on a tangle of dry bushes, covered by a thin layer of snow, a few meters from the fallen tree. They were dwarf willow bushes, whose thin, dry branches were highly flammable. With renewed energy, Anya dropped the axe and began to tear the dry branches from the bushes. Her hands, already raw, ignored the pain. She piled them near the bonfire, creating a stack that grew more quickly than the heavy logs. The smell of resin and smoke mingled with the icy air. The tigers, sensing the change in smell and seeing the fire's intensity increase, retreated a few more steps, their tails twitching nervously. The girl worked frantically, moving at a pace that seemed impossible for her exhausted body. She didn't think of the cold, hunger, or fear. She thought only of Grandma Lena, of the image of her hands weaving, of her peaceful smile. That image was her shield, her strength. Every dry branch she brought was a silent prayer, a promise of protection. When the pile of dry branches was considerable, Anya had another idea. The strong wind, which had previously been her enemy, could now be her ally. If she lit small fires at different points around the cabin, using the dry bushes as fuel, the wind would spread the smoke and sparks, creating the illusion of a forest fire, something that would terrify even the hungriest predators. She took a burning branch from the main bonfire, shielding it with her body from the wind. Carefully, she carried it to the first pile of dry bushes. The flame licked the wood, and in seconds, a new, smaller fire erupted, crackling and sending sparks into the dark sky. The tiger's growls intensified. Now mixed with grunts of alarm, they began to move, not to attack but to retreat from the forming line of fire. Anya repeated the process, running from one point to another, lighting a new fire each time. The ring of flames and smoke around the cabin began to expand, a blazing barrier that seemed to dance with the fury of the wind. The heat was intense near the fires, but the tundra's cold still bit at her face and hands. Her lungs burned, but she continued, a small warrior against the icy vastness. The tigers, now visibly disturbed, began to disperse, some retreating into the darkness of the forest, others circling, confused and frightened by the spectacle of flames. Anya's strategy was working. It wasn't a fight of brute force, but of intelligence and cunning, the same wisdom her ancestors had used for millennia to survive in Yakutia. The cabin, once a fragile point, was now surrounded by a ring of light and warmth, a bastion of hope against the darkness of the night and the threat of the 1,000 tigers. Anya, exhausted but with a gleam of triumph in her eyes, watched the pack retreat, her heart pounding with the certainty that she had found a way to protect her beloved grandmother. Anya, exhausted but with a gleam of triumph in her eyes, watched the pack retreat, her heart pounding with the certainty that she had found a way to protect her beloved grandmother. The ring of flames and smoke, though still imperfect, was a wall of light and warmth against the relentless darkness of the tundra. The 1,000 yellow eyes, which had once seemed a menacing constellation, were now just distant points, some blending into the forest shadows, others disappearing completely into the blizzard that was beginning to thicken again. She let out a trembling sigh, feeling the weight of every aching muscle, the icy air burning her lungs with each deep inhalation. The victory, however, was only partial. The fire, her great ally, consumed the wood with a worrying voracity. The dry bushes, though effective in creating the illusion of a larger fire, burned quickly. The pile of branches she had collected with so much effort visibly diminished. The night was still young, and the cold of Yakutia was an enemy as persistent as the tigers. If the flames died out, the pack, cunning and patient, could return, hungrier and bolder than before. Anya knelt near the main bonfire, extending her hands to absorb the warmth emanating from it. Her fingers were numb, her toes tingled inside her boots, her face was smudged with soot and sweat, but a faint smile formed on her chapped lips. She had succeeded, she had faced the impossible, but the battle wasn't over. Ancestral wisdom whispered in her mind that vigilance was the key to survival. She needed more fuel, but her strength was almost exhausted. Every step was an effort, every movement a pain. Her eyes turned to the cabin where Grandma Lena slept, oblivious to everything. The image of her grandmother, so fragile and precious, rekindled a spark of energy in Anya. She couldn't rest, not yet. With the flint and some thin kindling, Anya began to rekindle the dying fires, spreading the embers with a branch to revive the flames. It was repetitive and exhausting work, but necessary. She couldn't afford to let any fire go out completely, as rekindling them from scratch would be even harder. As she worked, her eyes swept the darkness, searching for any sign of the tiger's return. The silence of the tundra, once oppressive, was now filled by the crackling of the flames and the distant howl of the wind. There were no more growls, just the sound of nature in its icy majesty. But she knew that danger was always lurking, an invisible shadow in the white vastness. Anya thought of her ancestors' stories, of the hunters who spent entire nights on vigil, protecting their families and their herds. They didn't surrender to exhaustion, didn't yield to fear. They understood that life in Yakutia was a constant dance with death, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but action despite it. She needed a long-term solution to keep the fire burning without exhausting her last reserves of energy. Her eyes fixed on the deep snow covering the ground. Grandma Lena, in her stories, spoke of how ice and snow could be used to build shelters and protect warmth. What if snow could be used to control the fire, to make it last longer, burning more slowly? The idea was risky. Using snow near the fire could extinguish it, but if done carefully, it could create an insulating barrier, concentrating the heat and protecting the wood from the wind. Anya looked at the cabin, then at the fire, and a new determination shone in her tired eyes. She had to try. Her grandmother's life depended on it. With her hands, she began to gather handfuls of snow, compacting them and forming small balls of ice. With extreme care, she placed them around the base of the fires, creating a ring of snow that embraced the flames, but without touching them directly. The snow began to melt slowly, releasing steam, but the wood continued to burn, protected and insulated. It was a subtle technique, a delicate ballet between heat and cold, life and death. Anya felt a new wave of hope, a warmth that came not just from the fire, but from the certainty that she was using the wisdom of her people to overcome yet another challenge. Anya felt a new wave of hope, a warmth that came not just from the fire, but from the certainty that she was using the wisdom of her people to overcome yet another challenge. The ring of snow around the fires worked, making the flames lick the wood with surprising persistence, releasing a soft steam that mingled with the smoke in the icy air. It was a delicate ballet, a dance between fire and ice, that prolonged the life of each ember and gave the girl precious breathing room. With her hands now less numb thanks to the warmth, Anya continued to shape the snow barriers, moving with renewed purpose. Her eyes, though heavy with fatigue, did not lose their vigilance. The tiger pack, once a wall of yellow eyes, had retreated even further, their forms barely visible in the gloom of the seemingly endless night. The silence of the tundra, punctuated only by the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of the wind, was a relief, but also a trap. The absence of growls did not mean the absence of danger. Anya remembered Grandma Lena's stories about the cunning of big cats, how they could wait for hours, days, for a single opportunity. They weren't just creatures of brute force, they were strategists, patient hunters who knew every secret of snow and ice. A shiver ran down Anya's spine, even under the warmth of the flames. That silence was heavy, premonitory. She finished reinforcing one of the smaller fires, smoothing the compacted snow with her hands. She stood up, stretching her aching back, and scanned the vast darkness. It was then that she saw it. Not one tiger, but 3 of them. Bolder, or perhaps hungrier, who had separated from the main group. They weren't approaching the fire directly. Instead, they were circling the cabin, moving with calculated, almost imperceptible slowness along the darker edge of the forest, where shadows were densest and the glow of the flames didn't reach with such intensity. Their eyes, now lower and stealthier, seemed to search for a gap, a weak point in Anya's improvised defense. They weren't retreating, they were flanking, The hope that had warmed Anya's heart moments before turned into a knot of ice in her stomach. Ancestral wisdom, which she had invoked with such fervor, now turned against her, revealing the relentless intelligence of her adversaries. Grandma Lena was safe for now in her world of silence, oblivious to the new threat unfolding. Anya felt a momentary despair, a wave of exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. Her plan, so ingenious, had not foreseen this tactic. The tigers were not an irrational mass. They were individuals with keen instincts and an adaptability that rivaled her own. She watched the three figures move, each step a promise of danger. They moved further and further from the circle of fire, seeking a point where they could approach the cabin without being seen or affected by the heat. The snow, which had once been an ally for the fire, now became a cloak for the silent advance of the predators. Anya needed to act, and fast. The fire barrier, though effective against the horde, was not impenetrable against the cunning of a few. She couldn't let them reach the back of the cabin, where there were no fires. The axe, which had once seemed a burden, was now her only companion. She gripped it tightly, feeling the cold metal in her palm. Ancestral wisdom spoke of deceiving, of disorienting, but also of facing danger with her head held high. Her eyes fixed on an old wooden sled leaning against the cabin wall, covered by a torn tarp. It was heavy, but it could be used. A new, even riskier idea began to form in her mind, one that would require not only courage, but a speed and precision she barely knew if she possessed. The night was far from over, and the battle for her grandmother's and her own survival had just gained a new and terrible chapter. Anya gripped the axe, the icy metal in her palm, as her eyes fixed on the old wooden sled. The torn tarp covering it seemed like a shroud, hiding the potential for new hope or disaster. The three tigers, stealthy shadows in the gloom, continued their calculated movement, circling the cabin. They were the personification of cunning, of patience, and Anya knew she couldn't underestimate them. The idea bubbling in her mind was bold, almost insane, but desperation pushed her beyond the limits of what she thought she was capable of. She remembered Grandma Lena's stories about the YAKUT hunters who, when cornered, used the snow itself to create barriers or the wind to disorient predators. But what she was thinking now was different. With one last look at the advancing tigers, Anya ran to the sled. The wood was heavy, frozen, but she dragged it away from the cabin wall with a strength she didn't know she possessed. The creak of the wood against the compacted snow echoed in the silence, and the tigers paused for an instant, their heads turning to the sound, eyes gleaming in the darkness. Anya had no time to hesitate. She needed fuel, and fast. Her eyes swept the area, searching for the dwarf willow bushes she had used before. There were a few more untouched, further from the main bonfire. With the axe, she began to cut the dry branches with renewed fury, piling them onto the sled. Every blow was a silent cry of determination. The pile of dry branches on the sled grew quickly. Anya, her hands trembling from exhaustion and cold, but driven by fierce adrenaline, turned to the nearest bonfire. She took a burning branch, shielding the flame with her body, and carried it to the sled. The dry branches on the sled caught fire almost instantly, crackling and sending sparks into the sky. Dense smoke rose, mingling with the steam from the melting ice. The sled transformed into a small mobile bonfire, a beacon of flames and smoke. The three tigers, who had resumed their cautious advance, stopped abruptly. The fire, which they respected, was now moving towards them. Anya didn't wait. With all her strength, she pushed the burning sled towards the edge of the forest where the tigers were. The sled slid over the snow, gaining speed, flames dancing and smoke swirling. It was a terrifying spectacle, an improvised weapon against the cunning of the predators. The tigers, caught by surprise by the flaming object moving towards them, let out growls of alarm. It wasn't a direct attack, but a threat they didn't expect. They retreated, not in full panic, but with evident caution, their hunting instincts momentarily overcome by the fear of moving fire. Anya watched the burning sled continue its course, stopping only when it hit a denser snowdrift. The flames continued to burn, creating a new barrier of light and warmth in the part of the forest the tigers had been trying to flank. She felt an overwhelming relief, a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Her knees buckled and she fell into the snow, her body trembling, but her heart full of a small victory. The three disoriented tigers no longer tried to circle the cabin. Instead, they rejoined the rest of the pack, which was now even further away, observing the new fire with a mixture of frustration and respect. The night was still long, but Anya had bought time. She had proven once again that courage and intelligence could overcome brute force, even in the relentless vastness of Yakutia. She closed her eyes for an instant, the image of Grandma Lena in her mind, a constant reminder of the love that propelled her. Anya closed her eyes for an instant, the image of Grandma Lena in her mind, a constant reminder of the love that propelled her. That momentary relief, however, was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her body, which had found brief rest in the snow, reacted with intense shivers, reminding her of the brutal cold that surrounded her. The adrenaline that had propelled her began to wane, and real, deep, overwhelming fatigue threatened to engulf her. She forced herself to stand, every muscle protesting, every joint creaking. The fires, now more numerous and spread out, crackled with renewed energy. But the burning sled, which had been her most ingenious weapon, began to consume itself, its flames gradually diminishing. The smoke, once dense and frightening, thinned in the icy air. The tigers, though retreated, had not disappeared. Their eyes, now more distant, were still points of light in the darkness, a silent promise that the threat persisted. Anya knew the night was far from over, and dawn seemed a distant mirage. The need for more fuel was urgent. The pile of dry branches she had collected with so much effort was almost gone. The dead tree, which she had tried to cut earlier, remained unyielding, a monument to her physical powerlessness against nature. Her eyes swept the tundra again, searching for anything that could burn, any fragment of life that winter had not completely devoured. Despair began to seep in, a different cold, deeper than that of Yakutia. But the image of Grandma Lena, sleeping peacefully in the cabin, oblivious to the battle raging outside, was a shield against despair. Anya couldn't fail, not after everything. The wisdom of her ancestors, which spoke of resilience and finding solutions where there seemed to be none, echoed in her mind. She needed something more, something that didn't depend on her already exhausted physical strength. Her eyes fixed on the cabin again, not on the door, but on the roof. It was a traditional roof made of wooden logs and covered by a thick layer of moss and earth, insulated with compacted snow. But there was a part near the chimney where some thinner logs, used to support the snow, seemed more accessible. What if she could reach those logs? They would be harder to pull off, but they would burn longer than the dry branches. The idea was dangerous. Climbing onto the roof amidst the darkness and ice was an enormous risk. A fall could mean the end, not just for her, but for Grandma Lena. But what else was left? Inaction was a more certain death sentence. With renewed determination, Anya retrieved the axe. It seemed heavier now, a burden, but also her only tool. She dragged a smaller log, which she had used for the bonfire, to the cabin wall, using it as an improvised step. Carefully, she tested its weight, making sure it wouldn't slip on the snow. Her fingers, still numb, clung to the crevices of the wood, seeking support. Every movement was slow, calculated, a precarious dance between the desire to live and imminent danger. Anya began to climb. The cold of the wood penetrated her thin gloves, and the wind howled, trying to knock her down. She felt her heart pound in her chest, fear tightening her throat, but the sight of Grandma Lena, so vulnerable, was her driving force. She reached the roof, crawling over the compacted snow, feeling the ice beneath her hands. The tigers, now just distant shadows, seemed to watch her, silent, waiting. With the axe, Anya began to strike the thinner logs of the roof, near the chimney. The sound of the blows echoed in the night, a sound of resistance. The wood was frozen, but she persisted, each blow a prayer, a promise. She needed more time, more warmth, more hope, and the cabin roof, which had once been just a shelter, now became a source of salvation. The battle was not just against the tigers, but against time and the cold itself, a fight for life in its purest and most desperate form. Anya struck the roof logs with the axe, each impact reverberating through her numb arms and up her spine. The dry sound of the frozen wood, breaking under the force of her desperate blows, was loud in the stillness of the night, a solitary echo of her struggle. She knew that Grandma Lena, in her deep sleep and silent world, would hear nothing. This awareness, though painful, also freed her to do what was necessary without worrying about alarming her grandmother. The logs, though thinner than the main beams, were held fast by the rigidity of ice and decades of compacted snow. The axe bounced off, making her muscles scream in protest. The cold of the wood penetrated her thin gloves, and her fingers felt like stiff claws, barely able to hold the tool. The wind, her constant enemy, whipped her face and tried to unbalance her on the slippery roof. She clung with one hand, the axe in the other, her knees bent, her body tense in a supreme effort. Anya thought of her people's stories, of how the Yakuts built their dwellings with the wisdom of those who knew nature's fury. Every log, every layer of moss was a promise of protection. And now she was dismantling that protection for an even greater need for survival. It was a cruel irony, but a necessary one. Finally, with a stronger blow and a groan of effort, one of the logs gave way. It broke free with a loud crack, sliding down the slope of the roof. Anya instinctively reached out, trying to catch it, but the log was too heavy. It rolled through the snow and fell to the ground with a dull thud, raising a small cloud of snow. Anya held her breath, watching where the log fell. The tiger's eyes, which had been distant points, now seemed to fix on the sound, their silhouettes moving slightly in the gloom. They didn't approach, but their vigilance was palpable, a constant threat. Anya needed to be more careful. She couldn't afford to lose more logs or make unnecessary noise. She crawled closer to the edge, but still safely, and began to maneuver the next log, trying to guide it to a point where she could lower it without falling or making too much noise. It was slow and meticulous work. Sweat ran down her forehead, mixing with soot and ice, but she didn't stop. 2 more logs were carefully dislodged and pushed, one at a time, to the ground. They weren't large, but they were substantial and would burn for hours, giving her the precious time she so desperately needed. The sight of the logs on the ground, a small pile of salvation, rekindled a flame of hope in her chest. Climbing down from the roof was almost as difficult as climbing up. She used the improvised log as a step again, feeling every aching muscle as she braced herself and descended cautiously. Her feet touched the icy ground with a relief that made her sway. She knelt for a moment, her hands on her knees, breathing deeply the frigid air. Anya looked at the logs. The challenge now was to drag them to the fires, which urgently needed to be fed. The burning sled had turned into a pile of dark embers, and the other fires, though still lit thanks to the snow, needed more fuel to maintain their intensity. With renewed effort, she grabbed the first log, dragging it through the snow. It was a considerable weight for her 12 years and exhausted body, but the image of Grandma Lena, the unconditional love that bound them, was a force that surpassed any physical limit. She knew that every log that fed the fire was a breath of life for her grandmother. Anya worked in silence, dragging the logs one by one, distributing them among the fires that surrounded the cabin. The crackling of the flames, now stronger and brighter, was a melody of victory amidst the howling wind. Smoke rose again, dense and protective, forming a barrier against the curious eyes of the tigers. Dawn was still far off, but Anya had bought more time, and in the relentless vastness of Yakutia, time was the most valuable currency of all. Anya felt the warmth of the newly fed flames envelop her exhausted body, a temporary balm against the biting cold. The logs, once part of the shelter, now crackled with renewed strength, casting dancing shadows that stretched and receded in the snow. The smoke, denser, ascended like a protective pillar, mingling with the icy vapor. She watched the spectacle, her eyes heavy but still vigilant. The tigers, though more distant, had not given up. Their eyes, like yellow embers in the darkness, dotted the forest's edge, a silent promise that their weight was as relentless as winter. Anya knew that night was an eternity in Yakutia, and each victory was just a breath before the next challenge. The relief she had felt at seeing the stronger flames was ephemeral. The fatigue, which she had managed to push away with adrenaline, now returned with full force, weighing on her shoulders, on her eyelids. She felt her stomach rumble, a cruel reminder that she hadn't eaten for hours, perhaps an entire day. Hunger was a silent enemy, as dangerous as the tigers, eroding her strength and her ability to reason. The image of Grandma Lena, asleep in her world of silence, was the only thing that kept her standing. Her love for her grandmother was a warmth more potent than fire, an unbreakable force that propelled her onward. But what else could she do? The roof logs had been a desperate resource, and there was no more easily accessible wood. The tundra, vast and white, offered little beyond ice and snow. Her eyes swept the ground, searching for something, anything. It was then that she noticed. The snow around the fires, which had previously melted slowly, now formed small puddles of water that froze again at the edges furthest from the heat. The cycle of melting and freezing was creating a slippery ice crust. It wasn't an immediate threat from the tigers, but a subtle and treacherous danger to herself. One false step, a fall, and she could injure herself, becoming even more vulnerable. Anya remembered Grandma Lena's stories about the hidden dangers of ice, how it could be a deceptive surface, betraying even the most experienced hunters. Ancestral wisdom spoke not only of great battles, but also of attention to small details, to the subtlety of nature. She needed to ensure her own safety to be able to protect her grandmother. With the axe in hand, Anya began to break the thin layers of ice that formed around the fires, spreading looser snow over the slippery areas. It was tedious and repetitive work, but necessary. Every axe blow, every scrape in the snow, was an act of care, a way to prepare the ground for what was to come. She couldn't afford an accident. As she worked, her thoughts turned to the inside of the cabin. Grandma Lena was there, a fragile treasure, depending entirely on her. Anya felt a pang of guilt for having dismantled part of the roof, even if it was for a greater good. Would the cabin be less safe now? The question tormented her, adding a new weight to her heart. She needed to compensate somehow for what she had taken. The young Yakut girl paused for an instant, the axe hanging in her hand, her eyes fixed on the opening she had created in the roof. The cold entered through there, however small the opening, and that wasn't good for Grandma Lena. Anya knew she needed to seal that gap before dawn arrived, before the cold became even more unbearable. But how? There were no more logs, and climbing up again was a risk she preferred to avoid, unless absolutely necessary. She looked at the dwarf willow bushes that still remained, the ones she had spared, so as not to exhaust everything. They were flexible but thin. They wouldn't serve to seal the opening. But what if she could weave something that could be pushed into the hole and fill the space? The idea was a flash of hope in her exhausted mind. She needed something that could insulate, something light enough to be maneuvered from below. Anya began to gather the longer, more flexible branches of the dwarf willows, piling them near the cabin. Her fingers, though aching, began to work with a new urgency. She remembered how Grandma Lena, in her teachings, showed how nature offered solutions for everything, even for the most improbable challenges. The night continued its relentless march, but Anya would not be defeated. She would weave, with the strength of her love, a new protection. With the flexible branches of the dwarf willows in her hands, Anya began to work. Her fingers, though stiff and numb from the cold, tried to imitate the movements Grandma Lena made when weaving baskets or traps for small animals. It wasn't delicate weaving. It was a struggle against the stiffness of the material and her own exhaustion. Each branch she bent and intertwined seemed to resist, sometimes breaking, hurting her already battered hands. The smoke from the fires, which had previously protected her, now made her eyes burn, and soot clung to her sweaty face. She thought of Grandma Lena, of how the elder, even without hearing, felt the world through her hands, through its vibrations. Anya tried to channel that same sensitivity, that same patience, into her task. She wasn't just weaving branches, she was weaving hope, a barrier against the cold that threatened her grandmother's life. Slowly, an improvised mat began to take shape, rustic and irregular, but dense enough to fill the opening in the roof. It was heavy, heavier than she expected, and the thought of carrying it to the roof again made her heart sink. But there was no other option. The cold, which was already seeping through the gap, was a silent and constant threat. The tigers, though still distant, seemed to have noticed the decrease in heat and smoke at certain points. Low, guttural growls echoed in the darkness, more frequent now, like a dark orchestra of impatience. Anya felt a shiver run down her spine, not just from the cold, but from renewed fear. She dragged the branch mat to the cabin wall, where the log still served as a step. The axe, which she hadn't let go of, was carefully placed in the snow beside her. With a deep sigh, Anya began to climb again. Every movement was torture for her aching muscles. The weight of the mat, which she tried to balance on one shoulder, pulled her down, threatening to make her slip with each uncertain step. The wind, like a mocking spirit, tried to tear the mat from her hands, whipping her with icy gusts. Finally, with an effort that seemed to exhaust the last reserves of her soul, she reached the roof. She crawled to the opening, her heart pounding erratically in her chest. The tiger's eyes below seemed brighter, more attentive. She could feel the tension in the air, the predator's anticipation. It was now or never. With trembling hands, Anya began to push the branch mat into the opening. It was a tight fit, and she had to use all her strength to force it into place. The wood creaked, the snow crumbled, and for a moment she feared the mat wouldn't fit. But she persisted, pushing, adjusting, until finally, with one last effort, the mat fit, sealing the gap. A warm relief, almost imperceptible, spread through her. The icy wind that had previously entered through the opening was blocked, and the sound of growls, though still present, seemed a little more muffled. Anya lay for an instant on the roof snow, her body exhausted, her breath ragged. She had succeeded. She had protected Grandma Lena once again, but the victory was only partial. Dawn was still far off, and the frozen vastness of Yakutia was unforgiving. The tigers, though frustrated, wouldn't leave. She knew that. The fight for survival continued, but now, with the roof sealed and the fires fed, Anya felt a new wave of determination. She descended from the roof with more caution than ever, the axe back in her hand. Her eyes swept the forest's edge. The yellow dots of the tiger's eyes were still there, but there was a subtle difference. They seemed more distant, less aggressive, as if the relentless determination of that small girl had, for a moment, disheartened them. Anya knew she needed to remain vigilant, But deep in her heart, a small flame of hope burned, stronger than the cold, brighter than the darkness. Love, she realized, was the most powerful weapon. Love, she realized, was the most powerful weapon. This certainty, more than the warmth of the fires or the smoke barrier, warmed her chest as she watched the tiger's eyes in the darkness. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the yellow dots began to diminish. There was no final growl, no desperate charge, just a gradual retreat, one by one, the massive silhouettes merging with the distant forest. Anya's persistence, her intelligence in using the environment, and the unwavering strength of her love for Grandma Lena had broken the predator's resolve. They were animals, yes, but also creatures of instinct who recognized when prey was more than it seemed. Anya remained standing for long minutes, the axe still firm in her hands. Even after the last yellow gleam disappeared, she waited, her body tense, her heart still pounding. The silence that followed was not the oppressive silence of threat, but a silence of relief, of hard-won peace. The wind still howled, but now it seemed to sing a song of victory. It was then that the first pale grey tones began to emerge on the eastern horizon. The darkness of the night, which had seemed endless, began to yield. Dawn in Yakutia was always a spectacle of cold colors and promises of a new day, and today, more than ever, it brought hope. The snow, once just a white and menacing blanket, now glittered with the nascent light, revealing the austere beauty of the tundra. Anya felt her legs weaken. The axe slipped from her hands and fell softly into the snow. She knelt, her face turned to the clearing sky, warm tears streaming down her frozen cheeks. They were not tears of sadness, but of exhaustion, gratitude, and a profound joy that seemed to overflow from her soul. She had succeeded. She and Grandma Lena were safe. With immense effort, she stood up, stumbling towards the cabin. The fires, though still lit, now seemed less urgent, their flames dancing at a calmer pace. Smoke rose lazily, mingling with the fresh morning air. Anya opened the cabin door carefully, the sound of the creaking wood seeming too loud in the newly settled silence. Inside, Grandma Lena still slept deeply, wrapped in furs, oblivious to everything. Her wrinkled face was serene, and a faint smile played on her lips. Anya felt a wave of overwhelming love. She approached the bed, knelt, and gently took her grandmother's aged hand. The skin was cold and soft, the veins prominent, telling the story of a life of labor and resilience. Grandma Lena slowly opened her eyes, blinking against the faint light entering through the crack in the door. Her eyes, previously clouded by sleep, focused on Anya. She didn't hear, but she felt her granddaughter's presence, the vibration of her touch, the emotion on her face. A wider smile formed on her lips. She squeezed Anya's hand, a silent gesture of affection and recognition. Anya leaned in and hugged her grandmother with all the strength she had left. There was no need for words. The touch, the warmth, the presence, everything spoke for itself. Grandma Lena returned the embrace, her fragile hands stroking her granddaughter's hair. It was a moment of pure connection, an unbreakable bond that had withstood the fury of nature and the threat of predators. The sun, now a golden sphere on the horizon, cast its first rays over the tundra. The cabin, once a besieged bastion, was now a sanctuary of peace and love. Anya knew that life in Yakutia would always bring new challenges, but she had learned that, with courage, ancestral wisdom, and the love that united them, they could overcome anything. The small 12-year-old girl, who had faced 1,000 tigers, was now the guardian of hope, the indomitable spirit of Yakutia, residing in her small but brave heart. The small 12-year-old girl, who had faced 1,000 tigers, was now the guardian of hope, the indomitable spirit of Yakutia, residing in her small but brave heart. The embrace between Anya and Grandma Lena deepened, a refuge of warmth and affection that dispelled the cold and fear of the newly conquered night. In her granddaughter's arms, Grandma Lena felt the vibrant energy, the pulse of a life that had fought and triumphed. Her eyes, which had witnessed so many silences and winters, now reflected a serene peace, a deep understanding that transcended words. She stroked Anya's hair, a gesture that spoke of pride, of a love that had bound them always and forever. Anya, in turn, felt her grandmother's fragility and strength. That aged body, which seemed so vulnerable, was in fact a pillar of wisdom, the root of her own courage. She inhaled the familiar scent of wood and smoke emanating from her grandmother's clothes, an aroma that for her meant home and safety. The rising sun painted the interior of the cabin with soft shades of orange and pink, revealing dust dancing in the light rays and the cozy simplicity of home. The silence, once heavy with threat, was now filled only by the distant crackling of the fires and the soft sound of her grandmother's breathing. When they separated from the embrace, Anya saw in Grandma Lena's eyes a silent question, a gentle curiosity about the long night. With a tired but victorious smile, Anya took her grandmother's hand and brought it to her own chest, where her heart still beat strongly, a testament to the battle. Then she pointed to the door, to the sun now shining outside, and made a broad gesture with her hands, simulating the pushing away of something large and dangerous. Grandma Lena watched every movement, every expression on her granddaughter's face. Although she couldn't hear the growls or the howling wind, she felt the tension Anya had carried and the liberation that now enveloped her. A mutual understanding, without the need for sounds, blossomed between them. The elder smiled again, a smile that reached her eyes, and nodded in approval, as if to say, "I knew you could do it, my little one." Anya felt a wave of warmth spread through her body, more comforting than any fire. It was the validation, the unbreakable connection that made them one. She sat beside her grandmother, resting her head on her shoulder. Fatigue still weighed heavily, but now it was a sweet fatigue, the result of an effort that had been worthwhile. Hunger, though present, didn't seem so urgent. Her soul was fed. The day promised to be another harsh winter day in Yakutia, but the landscape outside seemed different. The white of the snow was no longer just a backdrop of danger, but a field of possibilities, a canvas for new stories of overcoming. The tiger's tracks, if they still existed, would soon be covered by fresh snow, erasing the marks of a night of terror. What would remain were the marks on Anya's heart, the certainty of her own strength and the depth of her love. Anya closed her eyes for an instant, reliving the moments of fear and courage. She had transformed. The girl who feared the darkness and dangers of the tundra now knew that the greatest light resided within her. Ancestral wisdom, passed down by Grandma Lena through gestures and silent stories, had manifested in her actions, guiding her in every desperate step. She had learned that true strength was not in large muscles or weapons, but in persistence, intelligence, and above all, unconditional love. Grandma Lena, feeling her granddaughter relax beside her, squeezed her hand again. The future in Yakutia would always be uncertain, full of challenges that only relentless nature could impose. But now they were not alone. That bond forged in the fire of adversity was stronger than 1,000 winters, more resilient than any predator. Together they were the very personification of resilience, a living testament that the human spirit, when moved by love, can truly overcome the impossible. Hope was not just a word, it was the essence of their existence, a legacy that Anya would carry forever, illuminating the path in the vast and frozen land of her ancestors. Hope was not just a word, it was the essence of her existence, a legacy that Anya would carry forever, illuminating the path in the vast and frozen land of her ancestors. The days that followed that night of ordeal were marked by a different quietness. The tundra, once a stage of terror, now whispered secrets of resilience. Anya, beside her grandma Lena, felt the weight of the world, but also the lightness of a soul that had found its true strength. The cabin, with its mended roof and fires burning with renewed purpose, was more than a shelter. It was a sanctuary of memories and a promise of the future. Grandma Lena, in her perceptive silence, noticed the change in her granddaughter. Anya's eyes, once marked by childhood innocence, now carried a depth, a gleam of wisdom that only the harshest experience could forge. Although she couldn't hear, the elder read in Anya's hands, in her firmer gestures, the story of a battle won. She saw the determination in the girl's posture, the way she looked at the horizon, not with fear, but with reverent respect for nature and for herself. Anya, in turn, found a new way to communicate with her grandmother. It wasn't just the gestures Grandma Lena had taught her, but a language of the heart, an understanding that deepened with each dawn. She described the world outside with her hands, the movements of animals, the sparkle of the sun on untouched snow, the promise of a distant thaw. Grandma Lena responded with smiles, with gentle touches to her face, with a nod that said, "I understand, my dear. I always understood." The daily routine, once a constant struggle against cold and loneliness, was now filled with a higher purpose. Anya didn't just hunt or gather firewood. She observed, learned, absorbed every lesson of Yakutia. She remembered the tigers, not with resentment, but with the awareness that they were part of the cycle, a force of nature that had tested her and made her stronger. Ancestral wisdom, once just stories, was now a living part of her being, a guide in every decision, in every step in the snow. Days turned into weeks, and winter, though still relentless, seemed less threatening. The cabin became a beacon of hope in the white vastness. Other hunters and nomads who occasionally passed through the region noticed the aura of peace and strength emanating from the small dwelling. They didn't know about the 1,000 tigers, but they felt the presence of something extraordinary, a resilience that transcended the ordinary. Anya and Grandma Lena didn't tell their story aloud, but it was written in their eyes, in the quietness of their home, in the strength of their bond. Anya grew, not just in stature, but in spirit. The 12-year-old girl who had faced the impossible became a young woman, guardian of a legacy of altruism and connection. She knew that Yakutia would always bring challenges, but also reveal untamed beauty and inner strength. Her love for Grandma Lena, for the land, and for life, these were the pillars of her existence. With each dawn, as the sun painted the horizon, Anya felt the promise. As long as there was love, there would be hope. Their story wasn't just about surviving. It was about flourishing, finding light in the darkness, and the unwavering truth that the human heart, with love and courage, can ward off 1,000 hungry tigers, ensuring that life, in its purest and most resilient form, would always find a way.